Anybody here who does not know Hina Rabbani Khar? No? If you don't, well, then go outside and wait. You'll be detention. You'll be having detention. Now, everyone knows that she is a politician. She comes from Multan, and everybody knows that her father was a very eminent politician, Ghulam Nur Rabbani Khar. But can I ask you, Hina, just to start with, your mother? What kind of, I mean, I read all about your father, but what about your mother, the unsung heroine? What influence did she have in your life?
I mean, as all mothers do, not only in my life, I think in the house and in framing, frankly speaking, my father's work, both on the sort of the business side and on the political side. My mother's been what I would call a homemaker. I don't particularly like to call anyone a housewife, but my mother particularly was a homemaker because in some ways she ensured that her children outstripped her in their education, gave us the best of opportunities. And one thing I gave both my mother and father a great deal of credit for is the fact that we were a house of many girls. So we were 5 girls and a boy. And we came obviously from a very, very traditional family, where typically we were the first ones who went for, you know, in a non-all-girls environment. Typically, we were the first house which sent girls outside of Pakistan to study, and then pursue any profession and any interest also. You know, I was an avid mountain climber, a polo player of sorts, not very good at polo, but tried my hand at it, a horse rider, etc. And my parents let us be. And if you look at my family, you cannot tell we're from the same family because we're also different, because we were all allowed to pursue our interests the way we perceived it to be. So yes, my mother has played a massive, massive role in shaping all of her children to be who they are today.
Wonderful. And when you talk about access to education, you went to LUMS, okay? And you studied the economics, I think, yeah. And after that, you went to Amherst. Why the United States?
I guess because I mean, at that time at least, I had not been to the town Amherst before arriving there with my admission, as is typically the case, I think, for many. I had been to the United States multiple times, but not to Amherst particularly. And because in management, it is generally believed that the US does it well, right? And I was pursuing a management degree, so I just thought of exclusively, as a matter of fact, applying to the US. Okay. And at that time, the US was not as hostile as it is today in terms of how it treats non-American or non-white people. So it was never a question of, you know, and I think it still isn't, frankly speaking, question, because when you in it, you know, when you're living there, I don't think it is as bad as it appears from the outside.
Well, the student body is always much more accommodating than politicians or newspaper people tend to be. You have a much warmer interaction than with your contemporaries. While you were at LUMS, you wore jeans. When did this metamorphosis take place from jeans to this?
I still wear jeans.
Aha. Okay.
Yes, you know, because frankly speaking, I did not own I would not say single, because I had elder sisters, so I could happily borrow their pairs of nicely made shalwar kameezes. I was what is generally perceived to be a tomboy. My interests ensured that I needed to be dressed in a way where I could get in on the horse and off it without having to change clothing. So typically, yes, I was a very outdoorsy person. So obviously, and at that time, frankly speaking, again, I give my parents a lot of credit for, because now I go to LUMS and, you know, the dress code is rather liberal.
Yes.
When I went to LUMS, I remember on our inaugural or the first day of school, I was perhaps the only girl who was actually in sort of these rugged Levi's jeans. Everybody else was nicely dressed in what was considered to be, you know, more acceptable. So Pakistan in that way has transformed into what is considered to be acceptable, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that girls are no more just managing houses. You know, when you're in the real world doing the real stuff, I guess, you know, this change comes, and it's transformed. At that time, it was I remember an issue where you grew up after a certain number of years, you were expected to sort of, you know, dress in a way which was considered to be
ladylike. Ladylike.
Yeah,
okay.
Ladylike, okay.
All right. Now, when I was in Aitchison College, I was the principal. By the way, that does not appear on the CV in this. But I had the responsibility of guiding our students. And the advice I used to give to the boys was, and this was to the graduating class, in fact 2 years before when they went into A-levels, I said, listen, marry whomever your parents tell you to marry. And the parents would be very chuffed at this and say, ha, 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 you know, he's right, he's right. I'd say, marry whoever your parents tell you to marry, because you can always get married again. But choose your career very carefully, because you can't change your career. Now, Hina, conversely, you've had only one husband, but many careers.
Yeah, I prefer it that way.
Okay. You've been Minister of State for Finance and Economic Affairs under Shaukat Aziz Saab. And by the way, it might appeal to you to know that he has included your name in his memoirs. Okay? They're not worth reading except for your name. And then subsequently you presented the budget in 2010. And I'm going to ask you, you know, it's a daunting task to present a national budget. Had you read it before you presented it?
Absolutely. I mean, listen, I mean, before I was given the task of having to present the budget, because at that time, Shaukat Tareen Saab was the advisor, and there was this rule-based type of a thing as to an elected member of the House had to present the budget. So I had been in and around the Ministry of Finance by that time almost 5 years, because I was actively managing the economic affairs portfolio for almost 4 years before that. Right. And so I was, obviously, when you're in the job, you know exactly what you're doing, and in on every meeting that preceded the budget. So I was very, very involved with the process. I had an excellent working relationship, which is normally not the case, by the way, with the federal minister who was at that time Shaukat Tareen, and we worked rather well together. So yes, I had not only read the budget speech before, but also contributed to making the budget what it was.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm going to introduce a small anecdote here. I was sitting with a government officer. He happened to be the Secretary of Commerce at the time. And the Joint Secretary came in and he asked, but by the way, where's the other Joint Secretary? So the Secretary said, well, he's gone to the Cabinet to explain the import and export policy. So the Joint Secretary looked at it startled and he said, do you think they'll understand it? And the Secretary said, just be grateful they won't. Imagine the damage they'd cause if they did understand the policy. So it's wonderful to know that you were one of the few finance ministers who actually read the budget. Now, I'm going to turn to Mr. Hina Rabbani Khar. And that is your husband, Feroz Gulzar. And I'm going to ask you a question. By the way, when did you get married? Which year?
2008.
2008.
Late 2007.
Aha.
December 2007. Meaning
happy anniversary.
December 2007, yeah.
Okay, 2007-8. I'm going to ask you a question. It's something I noticed. In the West and in other countries, you have Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, you have Mrs. Bandaranaike, you have Mrs. Indira Gandhi, you have Mrs. Golda Meir. And then here we have Benazir Bhutto, Sayyida Abida Hussain, Mariam Nawaz, and Hina Rabbani Khar. They do not adopt their husband's name. Is it something peculiarly Pakistani?
No, not at all. I mean, I think your name is a very strong, for me, it's my identity, right? I was born in a certain family. I carried that name forever. By marrying a man who I obviously, love and am married to, for me to change my name doesn't in any way show my loyalty or affection for him in any way. I'm very attached to my identity, and as it happens, interestingly, two of my other sisters also did not change their name, their surname. So it wasn't because I was in politics, I chose not to do it. For me, I am known as my father's daughters. I would love to remain to be known with the identity that I was born. So yeah, for me, it's non-negotiable.
It's wonderful that you said in the sequence, and I'm quoting you, I love him and I'm married to him. Normally here they say, I'm married to them and therefore I love him. Now, I'm going to ask you, having a full-time career as you've had, it obviously poses and must have posed strains on a marriage. Let me give you an example of Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, for example. She, with Dennis Thatcher, who was not a politician, but she always insisted upon making his breakfast for him because she wanted to maintain the quality of their relationship as a couple. How do you maintain the equilibrium between you and Feroz Bhai? Do you take him for lunch at the Polo Lounge?
If you knew Feroz better, you would know that I really didn't need to make an effort to maintain that equilibrium. Okay. He does it for me.
Aha, okay. A number of hurdles. There was a counterpart of yours, not as foreign minister, Mrs. Barbara Castle. She was the first Labour minister, and she came to Pakistan in, I think it was the 1970s, and she was introduced to General Zia-ul-Haq. And at the cabinet meeting, General Zia-ul-Haq was very keen on demonstrating how much had been done for women. And so he asked each minister to explain all the initiatives in their respective ministries. And at the end of it, Mrs. Barbara Castle, who was a very feisty lady, she said, President, I'm delighted to see to hear of all the initiatives that have been made in Pakistan for empowerment. And after hearing all this, I really can't see why men should not do as well as women in Pakistan. So you have done as well as any man. But let me come down now to specifically a number of incidents which I think underscore what you've just said. The first was the Raymond Davis episode. You've maintained, and I think quite right, of an assertion of sovereignty. And you mentioned there are higher principles that have precedence over popular considerations. I mean, these are your own words. Were we wrong to knuckle under when we did? Should we have taken a stand when we did, rather than releasing this man?
You see, now this is the particular incident where I came in when the storm was already there, right? So, for instance, if you were to ask me about Salalah and how we acted and reacted, I was there when the incident happened. I was there when the storm was brewing. I was there in the thick of it. I had a say in how we dealt with it, right, from the beginning to the end.
Right.
And a big say in terms of defining the policy, closing NATO. I would take ownership of everything that happened. Now, with Raymond Davis, as you remember, my predecessor was in office when this whole issue erupted. It was handled a certain way which set the cast. Okay, so it had already predetermined as to how Pakistan, or which stance Pakistan had taken. Now, you saw that the President of the United States of America came on the podium and said that this guy, Raymond Davis, has diplomatic immunity.
Yes.
I will still question that.
Of course.
And for the simple reason that the rules are very clear. If you're a consulate staff, you typically don't have it. If you're an embassy staff, even if you're a PN, you have it. It's as simple as that.
And they have to notify the minister.
Exactly. And we know all types of interesting things which were happening in and around us. But of course, the compulsion of whether you want to hold a relationship which is already going south, hostage to the presence of one person, etc. So I can't really say I was in on the decision-making process at that particular time. So for me to really have make a judgment call on it, I didn't know the compulsions when it was dealt with the way it was, and it was dealt outside of our office.
But as a matter of principle, did we take the right decision, or regardless of compulsions, as a matter of, as a sovereign state, did we take the right decision?
No, meaning we ensured that according to our own processes, it was taken care of, right? Because we used the religious sort of loophole in it. So I guess in that it was taken care of. You had the shield of that. But you know, for instance, if you were to ask me, should we have given Dr. Shakil Afridi away post Abbottabad, post Osama bin Laden's killing? I said, as a matter of principle, as a matter of sovereignty, as a matter of having independent decisions, absolutely not. And as I said, because I was there from the beginning to the end, I can assure you that Dr. Shakil Afridi is still in Pakistani prison, right? So he was a CIA agent. He had helped an external intelligence agency with information which could have been useful for them, but maybe counterproductive for Pakistan, and that's also up in the air. And there was immense pressure. I cannot explain to you the degree of pressure, okay? So if I were to say that in the bilaterals that we had in Washington, D.C., in pretty much every meeting, whether it was on the Hill, in the State Department, outside in the White House, wherever it was, if we had a 45-minute meeting in each of those offices, at least 30 minutes used to be spent on Dr. Shakil Afridi. And if 30 minutes is an exaggeration, 20 minutes for sure, okay? And yet we did not cave in. Okay? So there are times to take a stand.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Osama bin Laden. It's the sort of word the name that we can now say, rather like Voldemort in, in Harry Potter. I'm going to ask you a question. You don't have to answer it, but I'd like you to. When did the Americans know that he was here?
You know, to be fair, we're all reading various versions. Hirsch's version, okay, and all these interesting versions which are coming in. Now, it is generally now believed that a few months from the time that the attack took place, right?
Okay.
That is what is generally believed.
Before
the attack
took
place,
okay.
So that's how it is. That's how we know it, right? Did we have any information? Clearly not. You know, in terms of, at least I did not. My office certainly did not.
Okay.
And from the looks of it, it seemed, I've said this many times, either all the people in the room were great actors who should be in Hollywood and Bollywood, or they also, at least the people in the room, you know, at the higher offices, didn't seem to really know.
Well, today, of course, we have only Lollywood. We can't even talk of Bollywood, okay?
Yeah, sure.
But I'll come to that in a moment. I find it very strange, as an adult, intelligent Pakistani, that a man who had 3 wives, and then from them he has 16 children in Ahmedabad, who would require medical attention, who would require, midwife services, whatever, vaccinations, and nobody should know that the man is there. The man was being monitored with heat-seeking intelligence service, X-rays. So I just find the whole thing, when you mentioned about 3 months before, we obviously knew. So when the attack takes place, our F-16s take off, and then they're called back. The whole thing, and they have Hillary Clinton with the president sitting in the Situation Room, watching it live, okay? Now, even Carter didn't attempt a thing like that when it came to the rescue of the hostages in Tehran, unless they were completely sure of the result. They wouldn't have taken a risk to do that. However, that's a personal opinion. Let me come to, you have met Hillary Clinton when she was the Secretary of State. What's your opinion on her?
Okay, 3 days before election.
That's why I'm asking
and
you.
Interestingly, this is the first time that she is short of the 270 electoral votes since the campaign started. No, not since the campaign, but since a long time. So Hillary Clinton, I believe, is somebody who's obviously very, very, to say that she is experienced would be an understatement, okay? She's lived through many, many lives of being part of the system, of guiding the system in some ways. And, you know, interestingly, I think if you look at Hillary Clinton, how she first appeared on the world scene, and what she represents now, she's come a long way, right? So you remember, as the wife of the governor of Arkansas, you know, she was considered to be too liberal to be the wife of a governor. The way she carried herself, the things that she said, all did not fit in with the establishment's view. And today she is represented and almost hated for being the establishment itself. So today in the US, you have a unique situation where 2 of the most unpopular candidates out of the 18 who were in the run are your candidates for presidency. So fascinating, interesting stuff happening around the world, right? Now, coming to Hillary Clinton, I think Hillary Clinton is somebody who truly believes in American exceptionalism. And this is not a compliment, right? Because when you believe in American exceptionalism, it means that you believe that when the US does something, it is always on the right? So I think the US has lost a lot of ground on terms of the moral authority in how they dealt with the interventions in both Afghanistan and Iraq, right? Abu Ghraib prison, Guantanamo Bay, the human rights abuse, etc. Now for the West, and this I keep on telling my prior colleagues, and now whenever I go and speak in think tanks, etc., that the West doesn't understand what it has done to mar its image and its moral policing rights on the rest of us who've been observant of all of this. So today when we were told as Pakistanis that it was our responsibility to house 3 million Afghan refugees under international obligations. And today the United Kingdom will say that they will take 20,000 over 5 years or something like that, when the US as a superpower with all the resources at its disposal will not even take 5,000 or less. So the principles that you hold others to, when you don't hold yourself to the same principles and you see the world as it is right now in a flux, you see Brexit, you see Trump, And what has Trump done in the world? He has made all types of hate speech a norm now.
That's right.
So the principles and the, I call it, and if I write a book, it's going to be a chapter in my book, I call it the de-civilization of the world.
Okay.
It's happening right in front of us.
Interesting. Okay. So in a sense, if I was to encapsulate what you've said, we seem to be moving forward from the 14th century of our calendar, and they are regressing.
Yes, I said this recently.
Yeah.
I just did. I
didn't hear you say it, by the way.
No. I'm so glad you said this, because it's literally true. And this is what I say to the Indians also, that happy repeating, the mistakes that Pakistan is getting out of. So we are weaning ourselves away from those mistakes, okay, of extremism, of not allowing free speech, of allowing elements which are extremist, full force, etc. We are weaning away from that. And you see India riding itself into it.
Yes.
Literally. Okay, for instance, even in Pakistan, for a TV channel to not air the views of an ex-home minister or an interior minister because it's a security hazard is not going to happen. No. Or probably has not happened for the last 10 years. No. It's happening in India, and they're congratulating themselves as they're doing it. So, but nevertheless, having said that, typically I think the Pakistani view is, oh my God, India is so bad, and they're so, they're doing it so obviously, and Modi is such an extremist, etc., that Pakistan must match up, right? My view is quite the opposite.
Okay.
In how we try to formulate Pakistan's foreign policy during our times, we said that we don't do a tit for tat. Okay, I talked about what you call a proactive foreign policy versus a reactive foreign policy. So a reactive foreign policy is, if India is being extremist, we will also do the same. If India is talking about war, we will also talk about war. If President, now Ashraf Ghani, at that time Karzai, says words of abuse about Pakistan, we will match it. That's reactive foreign policy. Proactive foreign policy is that you determine what your direction
what you want
is,
to do.
right?
Absolutely.
Then you do not swerve no matter who says what.
Absolutely.
So you tell the world that this is them and this is us, and there's a difference, and let the world see that difference.
Well, in a sense, you articulated what is the bedrock of Chinese foreign policy. They just go, it's like it's like a Queen Elizabeth or something. They've set their course and they go by it. Will she become president?
Okay, so interesting. This is my analysis, okay? So I'm going to fall on the UK to try and guide or misguide us, okay? So you had the conservative...
I'll come to them in a moment.
No.
Give me the answer for her.
I'm just saying what is guiding my opinion.
All
okay?
right.
So there are two possibilities. If you remember the second time around, David Cameron was supposed to be in a very neck-to-neck fight.
Okay.
Right? And they got a much bigger margin than they ever expected. That got him into the Brexit vote, right? Had he not gotten the margin that he wanted, they would have said, oh, the poor, coalition doesn't allow us to do it, etc., etc. So now the Brexit, I'm going to tell you this. This is very interesting. So the Brexit vote was happening, I believe, on the 23rd.
29th.
23rd.
23rd. Yes,
if it was, let's assume on the 23rd, right? So
yeah.
I happened to be in the UK for an international conference at the Chatham House, a big international conference, on the 18th. Okay,
That's
so
right.
on the evening of the 19th, I find myself on the dinner table, the head table, with 18 of the biggest think tanks in cross-Atlantic represented there, and a few former and current ministers, 18 people on that particular table. And I said, as an outsider, the only Asian on the table, if I were to ask you for a vote, how many of you think there's going to be Brexit? Not one person said it's going to happen.
Okay,
they all said, oh yes, we're trying to create noise and British, etc. So you see, currently, it could be either of the two situations. One, that we are believing it to be neck to neck, but she will take a much larger margin because people obviously may have reacted. Now, the recent stream of Trump wanting to, and the ability of him to be able to take out his voters, and his voters are much more likely to go out and vote on election day as opposed to the Democrats, who, because of the Hillary factor, are maybe not pushed to come out and vote. If it, for instance, if there was Bernie Sanders in the race, the Democrats would come out and have voted because they would have. So because of that factor. So frankly speaking, it's anyone's game. But if you ask my hunch, yes, she will. Yeah.
She will?
She will. I would believe she will.
Well, something just for the audience, one has to remember that you can win the popular vote in the United States
and still
but
lose
the presidential election because it's based on the delegates. And I think there, recognizing that Bill Clinton was for two elections, the first and then the re-election. She contested one election against Obama, so this is her second election.
Yes.
So in a sense, the Clintons have been at it for
a very long time,
four election campaigns. and if they don't know the ropes,
Sure.
then nobody does.
Sure.
Which brings me to the man who hasn't fought any election before, and that's Mr. Trump. Have you met him?
I haven't had the pleasure to meet him, I have to say.
Pleasure. Okay.
Quite interesting character, isn't he?
Well, he'd complain he hadn't had the pleasure of meeting you. But anybody in the audience has met Trump? Anybody been groped by Trump? This is the only opportunity you're going to have to confess. No? Okay. Well, anyway. There's a fear, I think, across the world that perhaps Mr. Trump might come in. There's a genuine fear. I certainly wake up in the middle of the night when I'm not answering Qasim's emails or messages, and I think, oh God, I hope Trump doesn't come in. Let me now move to Russia. You made a secret visit to Moscow, and while I'm not going to ask you what you discussed, but Moscow is it's moving out of what was its own very strong relationship with India. Under Putin, they are now more or less expanding their, not sphere of influence as much as the context, like you tried to do, like what is the Gujral doctrine, which is to have friendship with your neighbors, and it's too close for us not to be a neighbor.
Absolutely.
So the earlier support that they gave to India during the 71 war has, in a way, been vitiated. Did you find any evidence of that, of this desire to come close to Pakistan when you had this secret meeting?
Okay, I had two major interactions with the Russians on their soil. Of course, many on Pakistani soil, of course, and everywhere else. In the sense that typically on the sidelines of, and I have a lot of respect for instance, my counterpart then, who's still my counterpart. He's already been in the job, I think, 17 years.
Yes.
Mr. Lavrov, right?
Yes.
Who's an old, very experienced person. And I always really enjoyed my meetings with the Russians. Okay, I thought they were what you see is what you get. They don't sort of spin around. They say it as it is. And I actually, not as foreign minister, but as Minister for Economic Affairs, conducted the first joint ministerial commission in Moscow.
Okay.
So this was just when we were beginning to open. A new chapter, I think, in our relations with Russia. But I have to say that I do not like to look at Pakistan's relations with any country in the context of that country's relations with India. I feel it's a wrong way to look at it because it looks at it as a zero-sum game. Pakistan's relations with countries should be independent of whatever their relations with India are. So they can be very strong relations and we can still have very strong relations with the same countries. But there is, of course, as the US, you see, I think more than India moving towards US, it's the US which has moved towards India, right?
Absolutely.
With the Asia pivot, the coming out of China, the concerns
South China
with,
Sea
of
thing.
course, the South China Sea blown out of proportion in many ways. So all of this, the US has made a concerted decision that it is moving towards and has made many exceptions to accommodate Indian interests in many ways. So I think here in our audience or in our country, people should make no mistake as to which side the US is going to rely to promote, support within the region.
Yes.
So we should not be in any fictitious and delusional mode as to where we are within that. I don't think that's that bad.
No.
I think, frankly speaking, many decades of being close proximity to the US has not done wonders for Pakistan, okay? And this complete fascination that Pakistan has with American assistance, American aid. People like Dr. Ishrat Hussain, who I have great respect for, has written a lot of literature on the fact that Pakistani economy is not really dependent on American or any other aid, for that matter. Now, if you can play with the Pakistani economy by bad policy that this government, I feel, your exports are dwindling, your industry is closing, your agriculture is posting negative growth, and yet you are congratulating yourself on foreign exchange reserves. So that is internal, right? Yeah. So coming back to Moscow and to Russia, I think Pakistan's ties with Moscow are strengthening. By the way, a big thing, which I am happy to have been somewhat of I and the government, the Pakistan People's Party government, is the SCO. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where Russia is a major player, where Pakistan, together with Afghanistan, is now almost a member, will be formalized as a member, I think, in the next 2 months or so.
Okay.
So we are, yes, with Russia, I think we are finding ourselves to be much more on the same page with Russia than we used to before, and much less perhaps on the same page with the US than we used to before. So the dynamics are certainly changing. It is for us to recognize and accept those changing dynamics rather than to resist resist
Okay,
them.
I'm going to ask you a single answer question. Brexit. The court has given a decision. You have to go back to Parliament to get its approval. Will Theresa May call an election mid-year, next year? Yay or nay?
Personally, nay.
Nay. Okay. Next, China. You visited China in 2011. What is your view on CPEC? Is it a scam? Are we going to be paying through our nose? Will your children be paying for it?
Okay, I have a very strong opinion
Of
on
course, that's why I
CPEC.
want you to say it. Tell.
And unfortunately, it doesn't match with the typical Pakistani view
Doesn't
of
matter.
CPEC. So I'm going to venture, a display of my strong opinion by saying that CPEC is important. CPEC is good.
Yeah.
CPEC is infrastructural projects. Infrastructure can never be bad for a country. The cost of CPEC, however, should be much more transparent.
Absolutely.
A lot of people here are under the view, or are under the impression generally, that CPEC is a lot of grant assistance. To the best of my knowledge, there is probably not even an element of 10% or even 5% grant assistance. All of this is hardcore loans which the Pakistani
absolutely.
government is taking. And these are,
Absolutely.
by the way, not the DFI loans, the World Bank type
No,
of
they're not
subsidized loans.
concessional.
These are
They're
not
not
concessional in
concessional.
any way, right? Be that as it may, okay? Infrastructure can never be bad for the country. There will be a huge burden on the future generations and on the current generations to be able to repay it. All of that, fine. Now, my problem with this, with the way the government has run the narrative around CPEC is that CPEC is supposed to be a positive thing for Pakistan, right? It's supposed to be a good thing for Pakistan. Okay, first, another sideline. CPEC is not an exception to the rule as it is being portrayed in Pakistan.
No.
CPEC is the rule, okay? And let me explain what I'm saying. Please look into the infrastructural projects that China is doing in Kyrgyzstan, in Uzbekistan, in Tajikistan, in any country in Africa. They are all to the tune of $60 billion,
Yes,
anywhere between $30 to $100 billion, right? So when we portray in Pakistan that this is this big goodie that Pakistan has been given because of its deep strategic, and I do believe Pakistan, Pakistan has only one truly strategic ally, it is China. I believe that, I know that. However, to portray that this is this big goodie that only Pakistan has gotten as an exception to the rule, it is incorrect to portray that. Now, my biggest problem with how this government has treated CPEC is, instead of using this as a positive leverage nationally within the country and within the region and internationally, we have tried our best and worked over speed to ensure that we use it as a negative leverage.
Yes.
So the excuse is, and coming from important people within the Foreign Office, coming from important people within the cabinet, saying things like, oh, the US doesn't want normal ties with us because it is afraid of CPEC. Oh, India cannot take us because it is afraid of CPEC. Oh, Afghanistan and Iran have a problem with us because of CPEC, etc. This is leveraging it wrongly. Pakistan should be presenting itself to the world and saying, at least to the region, here is CPEC. It is primarily a north-south corridor which runs through as an artery through the length of Pakistan. People around the region, countries around the region, you will benefit from it because you will be able to connect to each other, east, west, north, south, through it, right?
Yeah.
Not as, oh, you're so jealous of us, now you're going to be doing all these conspiracies. So I have a serious problem with the narrative that this government has run on many, 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 many of your foreign policy issues.
One of the major reservations I have, and I hope as an intelligent Pakistani, is that many of the projects are energy projects, and they're coal-fired. We don't have indigenous coal here, regardless of what they say of Thad. We haven't been able to develop it for 65 years. We certainly are not going to do it for the next. The nature of the deposits is such. So here we have a absurd situation where we are setting up, and they have begun to disintegrate already because the Thar coal, the coal project, which was to be set up at Engro, they backed off, and now we're finding that one by one they're beginning to dismantle. However, let's move on to the country that we can't live with and we can't live without, and that's India. You have had discussions with S.M. Krishna, and during this you mentioned that there should be an acknowledgement of what you described as quickly stated positions. That kind of brings about the abrasiveness of the relationship. We have a present impasse. We've recalled we've asked them to take 8 of their diplomats back. They have sent back accusations, counter-accusations, continuous firing across the LOC. And the most recent is where there is a possibility that we will be reducing, calling back our High Commission, and they will call theirs, and bringing it down to a charge d'affaires level. It's not a happy situation. There's one man who is responsible for this. I think the gentleman who came here and gave a pink turban and Ravind. How would you handle Modi if you were today the finance minister, foreign minister?
You know, let's try and break this problem down, okay? Because I have seen in Pakistan, in reaction to what is happening in India, the space for critical analysis reduced substantially in the last few months, okay? And that is not something I wish upon Pakistan, okay? And I would refuse to fall under the pressure of, you know, trying to live up to the Patriotic Act by being all, you know, goody-goody about how Pakistan has handled this. I think, so in trying to break the problem down, there is the post-Kashmir phase, which we're currently living through, where the violence in Kashmir by Indian state exceeded all expectations and levels of, you know, civilizational decency or norms or etc. And there is the pre-Kashmir problem, okay? Pre-Kashmir violence problem. Now, within that context also, I was very sad, and I truly mean it, because I think when you're not really in the job, but you're looking at everything from the outside, you want some preservation of some of the work that you've done to remain, right? So it was sad that within months of this government taking over, India was back being referred to as the enemy, Dushman Mulk, okay? We had stopped that. As a rule within the Foreign Office, we had said, in no speech of the Prime Minister, President, Foreign Minister, anyone, you needed permission from as high as the Foreign Minister to allow anyone to make a negative comment about India, okay? And that gave us, people abroad, when I would go to Europe, etc., people would recognize that and say they have seen the difference in how Pakistan is dealing with India. This is pre-Modi. Of course, Modi came in after us. Now, very soon in Pakistan, this changed, okay? We were back to referring, and that gave you a place to speak to the Indians in a very different manner. I remember openly telling Mr. Krishna that we have made this change, and all I see you do is to repeat the same things which have been written by your bureaucrats on every forum that we meet. And he was rather embarrassed by it. And he sort of put away his notes on the side, and I think it was a good thing. We had that much trust that I could tell him off and tell him that you are not recognizing the change in Pakistan, you will miss this opportunity. And in some ways, India did miss that opportunity. Because India was still obsessed with that, you know, terrorism mantra. And I said, terrorism cannot be an issue with you. It's a bigger issue with us. We're the ones who are losing people every day because of terrorism. And you have one incident and you want to lock up all diplomatic ties, etc. These are incidents we live through on a daily basis, but we don't have the luxury to turn around and blame India every time, right?
BRICS. They tried to raise the issue at BRICS.
Exactly.
And have us declared a terrorist state.
Now, post-Modi, this government fell into the trap of matching up to Modi rhetoric, okay? Rather than distinguishing itself.
Okay, but how would you deal with Modi?
By exposing how different he was than the Pakistan which was moving forward and was wanting regional harmony. Okay, so I think the Prime Minister did the right thing by going to India when he was invited. I think it was entirely the right thing. Right after that, Modi started literally picking out everything from the wrong playbook. You know, this issue of our High Commissioner meeting the Hurriyat leaders. As Foreign Minister, when I went, I met the Hurriyat leaders before I met the Indian establishment, and everybody does. So it was no exception. It was the rule, and the Indians would always squabble about it and say things about it, and we would always do it. So to upping the ante at that level, Pakistan should have sort of dealt with it in a way which was much less hostile in terms of its narrative, and said that, you know, we want peace, we want dialogue, we want to continue on the course of dialogue. And mind you, because a lot of people say, oh, the circumstances were different when you were there. You know, when there was a moment I remember when I was in New York trying to chair the Security Council meeting, which we had happily gotten ourselves elected to in those times, in those very, very difficult times. And India had said that cross-border LOC, Pakistan had beheaded Indian soldiers. It was their army chief had given sort of aggressive statements and said that we will take revenge, etc. You know what we did? We calmly issued a statement from New York saying, we need to discuss this on the dialogue table. Pakistan is open to discussion at whatever level India chooses, Foreign Minister, Foreign Secretary, diplomatic, High Commissioner, whatever you choose. And all of a sudden, the temperatures came down, right? So there's a way to deal with
But to be fair, the present government has, on repeated occasions, through the Foreign Secretary and directly with Prime, held out the sort of olive branch to India and said that we want to open discussions and we wish to have. And of course, this is in consonance with the Shimla Agreement, where we, for different reasons, but we agreed that there would be bilateral things. Let's move now, because it's an education thing, it's done by Beacon House, and there's the future of education. Lenin, the Russian leader, had said, give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed that I have sown will never be uprooted. Well, we've had almost 20 times 4 years. All our social responsibilities seem to have been privatized. From the moment we're born in private hospitals, our lives, we are educated at private schools, minority, they prefer to private schools. When we're ill, we go to private hospitals, and when we die, we go to EDSA, and that's privatized as well. Someone has said that the private sector is focused on profit, not welfare, and the state has to provide all citizens with their basic rights. Citizens should not have to buy those rights. Now, one of the most successful models of social awareness and the provision of social services is, of course, Beacon House, because I think they and a number of other schools care 250,000 children. These are models, and as a Pakistani, I'm immensely proud of the achievements that have been done in this. I'm going to ask you a question, because your children are obviously following the 18th Amendment. Have we missed the bus when it comes to the national curriculum?
I think you can't say that we missed the bus, because you can correct it wrong anytime, right?
Okay.
But have we done what we needed to do? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Okay. And I'm very excited that you say it in the way that you do, because this is the serious problem that we had with the donors. And I remember speaking to the Americans about it within DC, because typically you see in Pakistan, another place where we've outsourced our social responsibilities of the state is to the donor agencies. Okay. Who come in droves. Okay. So there will be 100 donor agencies who want to fix one school in a certain area, right? And then it's more about inefficiencies than efficiencies.
Okay.
So typically they want to work entirely and exclusively with the non-governmental sector. And I remember sitting in, I think, DC, asking some congressmen the question when they were trying to explain why it is so important for all American assistance to go through NGOs, which I'm supportive of, but some of it should come through the state also. That would you be comfortable with the non-governmental sector handling the entire primary school responsibility within your state? So what you're trying to impose on us or tell us is the right thing to do. Why don't you start by starting an experiment at home first? So it's different standards, right?
Yes, because we're the crucible of experiment.
Sure.
They think they can get away with it.
Yeah.
Somebody once said, I read a report by the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. This is in 1956. And at that time, this report was chilling. It said that there are 3 or 4 flashpoints for nuclear war in the world. North Korea, South Korea, in Russia and the rest, and in India, between India and Pakistan. But Hina, what shook me was the remark that the reason why it's better for the nuclear holocaust to take place in India and Pakistan is because with the sea around India and the Himalayas in the north, any fallout will be contained. I said, hang on a moment, are we just going to be bombed simply so that you don't suffer radioactive? Anyway, but let me come back to this question of the national curriculum, and I've got a number of questions, so just give me a few seconds. I know, 1 second, just a few seconds. We've covered your youth, we've covered your education, we've covered your career, and a fantastic career, because I think you have become a role model for so many, many women and men in Pakistan, and I mean it quite sincerely. If you had to write your own epitaph, what would you like it to be?
I don't think I can answer it.
Why not? Too early?
Too early, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, to be fair, the one thing that I've learned in life is the more you know, the less you know, right? So typically, you're always on a very, very steep learning curve, and at different points in your life, you are undergoing very level of crash courses on a different aspect or a different discipline all the time. And I like to look at life as a journey in which you're on a constant learning curve. So you can't define yourself in any particular...
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm going to ask you, when the spirit of Hina Rabbani Khar looks down on her tombstone, will she want to see Hina Rabbani Khar, 26th Foreign Minister, second female prime minister.
No, I have no such aspirations. And certainly I don't want my tombstones to say, I was the 26th anything.
Okay.
You know, even my visiting card has my name in it and my number, okay? Because I think to define us by the jobs that you see people, I think in Pakistan we have a tendency, you know, if somebody's been a chairman of a committee and this long list of things that you've ever been in your entire life, you are what you are, defined by self of who and what you are right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Well,
So my tombstone better not carry anything like that. I would be very, very upset.
You stand for elections, I'll vote for you as the Prime Minister. Okay, there are a few questions and I'm going to read them out. A lot of them, by the way, and there's a whole batch of them, dealt with a lot of the points that we've already discussed, so I won't bore you with repetition of that. First, what is the secret behind your smartness?
God gifted, I have to say, my metabolism. I take it from my father's side of the family. And recently I went to a gym where they asked, you know, where you were supposed to sort of put your hands there and they told you your metabolic age. And mine came out to be 24 and I'm 38. So
wonderful. What Hina is saying is YSL and all of the other designers, you don't matter. It's God-given. Okay. Somebody else wants to know something, and I think it's appropriate because of the kind of environment we're in here. They want to know about your school life. And particularly kindergarten. What do you remember most about that?
I think kindergarten, I think, meaning I've just been a very outdoors person and I always had more friends who were boys than friends who were girls. So I was always much more interested in, you know, typically never into the sewing and the sort of looking after what you're wearing type of a mode. So I've just generally been on that trajectory until I came into politics, I guess. Okay. Yeah.
Now, Yashal Jalil, are you here? Yashal? Somebody? You've sent her a question, and which is, what do you think is Pakistan moving towards success or deterioration? But I better warn you, you've misspelled deterioration. So back to the classroom, Yad. So how would you know? Is it moving towards success or deterioration?
I think by and large, if you look at the trends, there are certain trends which are very positive in Pakistan, and I mentioned. But we see these periods where you seem to be falling back. So I would just say if my biggest concern right now is to let fear guide our future as we have let it guide our past, certainly. So this fear of India, fear of Afghanistan doing something, fear of the US trying to have a conspiracy, this fear closing the space for real dialogue which will improve the fate of this country. So I think by and large, Pakistan is moving in the right direction, but my fear or my concern would be that we let, because of these fears that we've allowed to sort of grow larger than I think they should have their required place, contract the space for independent thinking, critical analysis in putting this country constantly and consistently on the right course. Okay.
Another question which I've picked out of here is, what should Pakistan do, in your opinion, to come out from the so-called isolation in the world?
Okay, first of all, I don't think we are isolated. I really want to say this categorically because I don't think a country like Pakistan can be isolated, and certainly India's designs, and it's making a pretty impressive fool of itself in trying to follow a stated policy of isolation of Pakistan is ridiculous. And it's actually, in some ways, India is showing itself to be much smaller than the world wants to believe India to be. Because a country which wants to be a regional power, which wants to have a seat on the Security Council, is obsessed with one much smaller country on its side and is really defining its policy by it. I think India is making quite an interesting fool of itself within that. So what is the question?
Okay.
Yeah, have I answered the question?
Yeah, certainly. No, please. And here is one which is, of all the 25 predecessors, who's your ideal amongst them as the foreign minister?
Amongst the foreign ministers in Pakistan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. I mean, I read, so? Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Would you have said that when you were in PMLQ?
Of course, I remember, I never aspired, as I said, I never aspired to be in the position that God, frankly speaking, created opportunities. But I remember as an 8th grader in my village home, where we used to do a lot of read Zulfi Bhutto by Stanley Wolpert, and I remember being inspired by it to no limit. And any students out here who want to read memoirs, I think Stanley Wolpert's memoirs about all of our leaders, whether it's Jinnah or Gandhi, who was pre-partition, I think as much a Pakistani or people from Pakistan looked up to him also. So Gandhi, Jinnah, Bhutto, I think Stanley Wolpert does a great job in writing memoirs of people from South Asia.
He wrote a rather soft one as well on Mr. Bhutto. I mean, the controversial one about jinnah was, of course, that he drank and that he used to eat pork sandwiches. And that seemed to be a kind of outweigh what was the quality of that biography. It was a brilliant biography in terms of humanizing Jinnah Sahib. But in the case of Mr. Bhutto, I think what I found of that biography was that he was short on references. And considering that Mr. Bhutto was a man who documented his life with a lot of precision, most of which was that all those documents were then taken away during Ziaul Haq's time. Something which I think all of us should recognize is that Mr. Bhutto, he had a number of foibles, he had a number of weaknesses. In 1971, and I was young in those days, younger, I remember him going to Shimla. And he had no cards to play at all. India had 5,000 square miles of land in its custody in Sindh. It had 93,000 what we call prisoners of war and civilians under protective custody. And these were persons, about 27,000 of them out of the 95,000, were persons who were civilians, bankers, administrators, etc., who had been kept by the Indians unconscionably. Unconscionably, they were kept by the Indians, and they were on half rations because the POWs were covered by the Geneva Convention,
and the
civilians were not. And they were given half the rations that the POWs had. And when they were released finally, Mrs. Gandhi sent a bill for the food and the accommodation. And Mr. Bhutto, during the Shimla negotiations, I think played a masterful hand, and they realized this afterwards. Because we got back the land, and when they asked him, why didn't you ask for the POWs? He said, because they'll have to return them.
Exactly.
Land, we will get first. And so he asked for the land, and then when it became too embarrassing for the Indians, they returned the POWs and the CUPCs. What I'm trying to say is that we tend to forget and we tend to minimize what were the achievements of leaders, and we go into the baser politics of it. But I agree with you that he was one of the outstanding foreign ministers as such, and very well dressed as well. Okay. One final question. I think there was somebody in front. Yes, please. But make it very brief. No speeches. Yeah. Does Pakistan have a policy regarding Kashmir? Very quickly.
I think Pakistan's stated policy on Kashmir is clearly very repeatedly stated, which is according to the Security Council resolution, you require a plebiscite to be had over there. Once a plebiscite is to be had, the Kashmiris will choose either India or Pakistan. A lot of Kashmiris feel they should have a third choice, right? Yeah. I think as far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan wants a peaceful resolution to the issue. And any time an opportunity presents itself, as it did in the past many times, Pakistan would like the lives of the Kashmiris, the quality of their life to be improved, and Pakistan would probably be very, very willing to play any role that it does. And can I just say at the end that, you know, it's interesting because when people are in the act themselves, they don't understand as to how they're dealing with it. Because if you were to strategically look at what Modi has done as Prime Minister of India to the Kashmir cause, if anybody wished him to do more for the Kashmir cause, he probably couldn't have.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, recently we heard Mirza Waheed in London talk about how he has made it an irreversible process, that after what he has done to Kashmiris, the pellets, the blinding, Kashmiris will probably never find it appropriate to be able to coexist in India, which had become almost a reasonable option a few years back. Yeah. From back burner, he has made Kashmir come to the front pages of international news all over the world.
Well, no, hold on. One quotation I've come across, one quotation about Kashmir, and it applies to Kashmir. You can make a throne of bayonets. You can make a throne of bayonets, but you can't sit on it. It's not accidental that Jammu and Kashmir on our side, Azad Jammu and Kashmir, we have not had any problem, no insurrection. And for 70 years, on the other side, there's been nothing but. Let me ask you, this is the final remark. May I ask the audience to give a standing ovation to Hina Rabbani Khar, please.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.